And I think we can talk about it now, and if I can talk about it and bang the drum a bit.
It was supposed to be just another royal event, grand, formal, predictable. But when Catherine stepped into the room wearing Princess Diana's most iconic heirloom, everything froze. Across the hall, Queen Camilla's expression shifted, and what unfolded next shattered the carefully preserved balance of royal hierarchy. The chandeliers inside Buckingham Palace gleamed with ceremonial grandeur. Foreign dignitaries, political heavyweights, and prominent aristocrats gathered in polished silence, awaiting the royal family's entrance. This was the type of evening that thrived on protocol, an unspoken dance of status, power, and poise. But tradition faltered the moment Princess Catherine stepped through the entrance, carrying something far heavier than a title. Resting atop her head was the lover's knot tiara, once the most cherished and deeply personal piece in Princess Diana's collection. It was a crown of memory, legacy, and heartbreak, and its return did more than shimmer. It commanded the air itself. The atmosphere shifted violently, though the music still played. Guests stiffened. Conversations broke mid-sentence. Some instinctively turned their heads, while others lowered their voices into shocked murmurs. Catherine, elegant and calm, walked with quiet determination. Yet it was not her dress nor her grace that stunned the room. It was the heirloom glittering above her that drew every gaze. The tiara had vanished from public sight for years, buried in grief and silence. But now it re-emerged without warning, and no one knew why or how. Least of all, Queen Camilla. From her position across the room, Camilla saw her, and something inside her snapped, not in a tantrum or an outburst, but in that subtle, devastating way only the most controlled woman can unravel. Her expression flickered just for a heartbeat. Her steps slowed, her carefully measured smile weakened at the corners. In that single glance, the weight of old resentments came crashing down on her shoulders. It was as if Diana had walked back into the room and taken her seat at the table once again, only this time, through the vessel of a woman the public had already begun to favor more than her. The tiara, once a symbol of a bruised but unbreakable princess, had found its way onto Catherine's head, but not through an accident, and certainly not through Camilla's blessing. It hadn't been announced, it hadn't been discussed, and most importantly, it hadn't been approved. In royal circles, that kind of move is never just a fashion choice. It's a declaration. And this one had been made in public, at a time when Catherine and Camilla were both meant to shine under the same roof, but not on equal footing. What stung even more was how naturally the moment seemed to favor Catherine. She didn't flaunt the heirloom, she didn't even seem aware of the emotional earthquake she had triggered. But that only made it worse for Camilla. For years, she had battled to define her place beside the king. And now, without a word, a younger woman had reignited an entire era with a single symbol that never belonged to her, but somehow fit her perfectly. The whispers grew louder. Long-time royal observers watched closely, noting Camilla's flickering demeanor and Catherine's composed aura. Everyone could feel the tension seeping through the gold-trimmed walls. This wasn't a misstep. It was a silent war. A single piece of jewelry had turned an ordinary banquet into a battlefield of legacy, love, and loyalty. The stage had been set, and the audience was already choosing sides. But this wasn't just about a tiara. It was about territory, legacy, and a deeply buried rivalry that was now being forced into the spotlight. What Catherine wore wasn't just an accessory, it was Diana's voice speaking from the grave. A tiara heavy with memories, pain, and public love had returned. But it hadn't returned to the woman who believed she'd finally earned it. The lover's knot tiara wasn't born in scandal, but over time, it came to embody it. Forged in 1914 by the royal jeweler Gerard, the piece was originally commissioned for Queen Mary as a symbol of elegance, formality, and rank. But once it landed in Diana's hands, it transformed. The diamonds and pearls became something more than wealth. They became witnesses to heartbreak, to betrayal, to survive. When Diana wore that tiara, it wasn't just about royal protocol. It was armor, a glimmering shield that reflected the burden she carried behind the palace walls. And during the worst years of her marriage to Prince Charles, that weight dug deep. The world watched Diana stand beside a man who was already emotionally gone, while another woman watched from the shadows. Camilla had no crown, no tiara, no title. Yet her presence haunted Diana's every public smile, and the lover's knot tiara, with its heavy frame and unmistakable sparkle, became the very symbol of that contradiction. It crowned a woman beloved by the people but betrayed behind the scenes. The piece grew heavier each time Diana placed it on her head, not just physically, but emotionally. Over time, it stopped being a jewel and started being a ghost, carrying her sorrow, her strength, and her defiance. For Camilla, that tiara was never just another item in the vault. It was the crown she was never meant to wear, the emblem of a woman she could never replace. She spent decades reshaping her image, walking the long uphill road from mistress to queen consort. She smiled through whispers, ignored protesters, and endured icy headlines. Eventually, she won a title but not a place in people's hearts. The lover's knot remained untouched during that rise, locked away, preserved, as if the monarchy itself knew it couldn't be worn by anyone else without consequences. And so, Camilla built her new life in the monarchy without it, but not without longing. Then came Catherine, and everything changed. When the tiara reappeared, worn not by the queen consort, but by the princess who reminded the world of Diana's poise, compassion, and tragedy, it felt like a resurrection. Diana was back, not in form, but in spirit. The public didn't see Catherine merely honoring tradition. They saw her carrying forward the story of a woman who had never truly left their hearts. And that made the message of the tiara impossible to ignore. For Camilla, it wasn't just shocking, it was humiliating. In her mind, that heirloom belonged to her now. She had waited. She had endured. She had risen. And yet, when the time came, it went to Catherine instead. The tiara hadn't returned to the woman who held the throne. It had returned to the one who held the people. And if the tiara had spoken, its message would have been loud and clear. The crown may sit on Camilla's head, but the heart of the monarchy had chosen someone else. Behind the queen's carefully practiced smile was a woman unraveling. In that single moment, everything Camilla had worked for felt like it was slipping through her fingers, and worse, it was slipping into the hands of Diana's chosen echo. Camilla had survived the storm once. She had stood in the eye of royal controversy, weathering decades of scandal, judgment, and whispers that never really left the walls of the palace. She had played the long game, enduring humiliation, as the woman who came second, the one blamed for breaking what the world saw as the perfect fairy tale. Every wave of public criticism had been met with silence, with patience, with the slow construction of a new image, one shaped not by love, but by endurance. And after years of standing in the shadows, she finally emerged as queen. But crowns do not erase memory. Titles do not rewrite history. And on the night Catherine appeared wearing Diana's most cherished tiara, Camilla realized the war she thought she'd won was far from over. She had always viewed Diana's legacy as a silent rival. Though Diana was long gone, her presence never truly faded. Her portrait still hung. Her name still echoed through headlines. And in the hearts of the people, she remained a queen, one who never needed a title to be adored. For Camilla, the reappearance of the lover's knot tiara was more than uncomfortable. It was humiliating. The sight of Catherine wearing it, carrying Diana's memory with such effortless grace, wasn't just symbolic, it was threatening. Camilla had spent years working to shift public perception, to prove that she too belonged in the story. Yet all it took was a single evening, one accessory, and a single woman to remind her that the crown on her head had never truly silenced the ghosts in the room. Behind palace doors, the cracks began to show. While the cameras captured grace, insiders heard something else entirely. Doors closing with force, voices raised in a tone not fit for royal corridors. Those close to Camilla said she was livid, not only at Catherine but at her own staff. Rumors whispered through the palace walls that she believed someone had allowed this to happen, that her aides had failed to protect her from this moment of emotional ambush. Words like betrayal and sabotage reportedly passed her lips, and while no official statement would ever confirm it, those present knew the air had thickened with more than protocol. It had thickened with fury. What made it worse was the realization that she was no longer in control. The narrative she had fought to rewrite was being undone not by scandal, not by tabloids, but by a memory too powerful to kill. Camilla had always known she could never erase Diana, but she had hoped to outlive her influence. Now, as the public watched Catherine channel everything Diana had once been. Elegant, warm, dignified, Camilla faced the crushing truth that the legacy she had worked so hard to bury was not just alive, it was thriving. But as Camilla's fury simmered behind closed doors, the public was already making their choice, and their eyes remained fixed on Catherine. In royal tradition, symbols speak louder than proclamations. And on that night, the tiara didn't just shine, it crowned Catherine in the hearts of millions, signaling a shift no one could undo. Crowns may be granted, titles bestowed, and roles handed down through bloodlines, but true, unwavering affection cannot be inherited. It must be earned. And in the heart of Buckingham Palace, with cameras flashing and guests whispering, a single moment of symbolic power shattered years of quiet calculation. Catherine didn't need to speak. She didn't need to posture or assert. The lover's knot tiara on her head did everything for her. With every step she took, she wasn't just honoring the past, she was stepping into it, breathing life into a memory that had been tucked away behind velvet curtains and porcelain smiles. The public didn't see formality. They saw familiarity. They saw grace, humility, and dignity, not manufactured, but instinctual. Not claimed, but lived. What happened that evening wasn't protocol, it was poetry. While Camilla stood with title and crown, it was Catherine who held the invisible throne, the one shaped by memory, not monarchy. The tiara was never just an accessory, it was a whisper from the past, a reminder of the woman who wore it through heartbreak and resilience. And as Catherine moved through the grand halls wearing it with a calm that mirrored Diana's unshakable poise, the public reacted not with applause, but with awe. Social media ignited like wildfire. Side-by-side images of Catherine and Diana flooded timelines, news tickers spun comparisons faster than the palace could manage, and hashtags bearing Diana's name rose in global trends once again. But the most haunting reaction came in the form of a single phrase echoed around the world. "She looks like Diana reborn." This was not just about admiration. This was about belonging. The people saw in Catherine what they had once seen in Diana, a quiet strength, a compassionate core, and an authenticity that could not be faked. Camilla may have carried the crown, but Catherine carried the people. That night, the lines blurred. It no longer mattered what tradition dictated. The monarchy, built on hierarchy, felt suddenly, unmistakably human. Catherine had touched something deeper than protocol. She had become something bigger than her role. The shift wasn't declared, it was felt. And what the people felt was not a preference, it was a revelation. The monarchy did not announce this transfer of emotional power. No statement was released. No press briefing was scheduled. But the message had already been received by millions. It had moved through chandeliers and corridors, across dining tables and into headlines. It had bypassed titles and landed directly in the hearts of those watching from afar. And as Catherine basked in silent admiration, a question echoed through the palace halls. Who had made this decision, and why? It was never meant to be public knowledge, but now the truth was too loud to contain. Queen Elizabeth had made a secret choice before her death, and it would ignite the most painful royal divide in years. Behind palace walls, power moves in silence. Titles may be inherited, but symbols, true symbols, are bestowed with intention. In the royal world, there is no room for sentiment in public, but behind closed doors, emotion drives the most pivotal decisions. And in the final years of Queen Elizabeth's reign, she made one that would reverberate through generations. The lover's knot tiara, once Diana's shield and legacy, had to be passed on. It was tradition. But whom it would be passed to wasn't just a matter of seniority, it was a matter of soul. And the late queen, despite her iron composure, made that decision with her heart, not the rulebook. According to insiders, the protocol was clear. The reigning monarch holds the final say in the allocation of all personal heirlooms, especially those tied to the royal vault. It was assumed, some even said, that Camilla, upon becoming queen consort, would have first choice. And for most pieces, she did. But not for this one. The lover's knot tiara, arguably the most emotionally charged relic in modern royal history, had already been quietly spoken for. Long before Elizabeth's passing, long before Camilla had officially risen to her final title, the decision had been sealed. The tiara would go to Catherine. It was not a decision made in haste. It was deliberate, private, protective. Those closest to the late queen reveal that her relationship with Catherine had grown in strength over the years, rooted in admiration not for grand gestures or ambition, but for the unwavering composure Catherine brought to the crown's future. In her, Elizabeth saw someone who could shoulder both the burden and the grace of the monarchy. She saw echoes of Diana, yes, but without the storm. Catherine had shown restraint, loyalty, and quiet power. And that, more than lineage or protocol, was what earned her the right to wear the most storied tiara in the royal vault. Even King Charles, it's believed, supported the decision. For all the complex history he shared with Diana, there was an unspoken need to preserve what she had come to represent. Giving the tiara to Camilla, after all that had unfolded in the past, would have reignited a fire that had only just begun to fade. But in Catherine's hands, it felt like peace, not erased, not a replacement, continuity. Camilla, however, was never told, at least not directly. And when the world saw that tiara glowing on Catherine's head, the truth hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a delay. It was a message, left behind by the very monarch Camilla had spent years trying to please. One final judgment. One final choice. For Camilla, that revelation wasn't just a blow, it was a betrayal by a woman she'd tried for years to win over. If Catherine had used a tiara to send a message, Camilla would now send one back with sharper diamonds, a colder smile, and a performance designed to reclaim the spotlight she felt was stolen from her. Camilla had been blindsided. The sting of Catherine's tiara moment still lingered like a fresh wound, but it wasn't humiliation that drove her next move. It was strategy. She'd clawed her way to the crown through decades of scorn, and she wasn't about to lose her footing now to a younger woman cloaked in the memory of Diana. So when the next state occasion appeared on the calendar, Camilla didn't retreat. She planned. Every detail was calculated. Every choice is deliberate. She would not wear just any crown. She would wear the crown. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, Queen Elizabeth's most iconic piece, the one most associated with a monarch who commanded global reverence. Camilla knew what she was doing. If Catherine had invoked Diana, Camilla would invoke the Queen. The press arrived early that evening, tipped off, perhaps intentionally, that Camilla was set to make a visual statement. And when she stepped forward for the cameras, draped in royal jewels with the Queen's favorite tiara gleaming atop her head, it was clear this was no accident. The headlines wrote themselves. Camilla reclaims the crown. A silent strike from the Queen Consort. Battle of the Tiaras. Royal commentators speculated about what this countermove meant. Was it a rebuttal? A challenge? A desperate plea for attention? But Camilla didn't care about the headlines. She cared about perception. And in her mind, she had just wrestled the narrative back into her hands. But narratives are not so easily controlled. Despite her attempt to reassert dominance, the media buzzed louder about Catherine. Social platforms didn't erupt with praise for Camilla's diamonds. They reposted images of Catherine in the lover's knot. Again, public interest didn't pivot toward Camilla's reclaimed dignity. It drifted further toward Catherine's quiet grace. The elegance Camilla hoped would remind the world of her own right to reign only served to underline what was already slipping: relevance. Camilla's moment had been built for impact, but it landed as something else entirely: desperation. Critics weren't cruel, but they were clear. Camilla's sudden shift in appearance and performance felt reactionary, not regal. The comparison to Catherine became inevitable, and worse, unflattering. While Catherine's symbolism had emerged effortlessly, Camilla's felt staged. Her attempt to overwrite the memory of the tiara moment instead reinforced it. The public saw through the spectacle. They didn't see power, they saw panic. Camilla had underestimated the emotional current moving beneath the royal surface. Crowns and jewels may catch the light, but they don't capture hearts. That requires something deeper, something you can't manufacture. And as the public's gaze remained locked on Catherine, Camilla realized the real battle was never about diamonds. It was about who the people chose to follow. Camilla tried to rewrite the page, but the ink had already dried, and the next chapter would only make it harder to turn back. Behind the palace doors, the two women finally collided, not in public, but in a private confrontation where smiles were gone and truths were laid bare. For days, the tension had been building like a silent storm within the palace walls. Whispers swirled through marble corridors, Staff exchanged cautious glances, and insiders knew something had shifted. The tiara moment had lit the fuse, but the explosion was still waiting behind closed doors. And when the door finally shut on a private room in Clarence House, the two most scrutinized women in the monarchy faced each other not as Duchess and Queen but as rivals, in a battle neither had chosen but both had inherited. The room had been cleared. No aides, no press. Just Catherine and Camilla. And what followed wasn't a shouting match. It was something far more dangerous. Raised voices, yes. But also the weaponizing of words laced with decades of pain and pride. Camilla, shaken by the media's obsession with Catherine's tiara appearance, didn't waste time on pleasantries. According to sources close to the palace, she accused Catherine of stepping out of line of using Diana's legacy as a tool. She allegedly called it a calculated move, a staged resurrection, a betrayal of the monarchy's delicate balance. But beneath the accusation was a deeper, more vulnerable truth. Camilla felt replaced. Again, she had spent her life trying to survive the shadow of Diana, only to watch it come alive once more in the woman standing across from her. And now, that woman wasn't just admired, she was adored, wearing the very crown Camilla believed should have been hers by right of title. To Camilla, this was theft, not of a tiara, but of dignity. Catherine, however, didn't flinch. She responded not with fire, but with frost. Her voice didn't rise, it steadied. She denied nothing. Instead, she leaned into the very legacy Camilla feared. She said the tiara wasn't about claiming Diana, it was about honoring her. Preserving the grace that once defined a generation's princess and giving the public a reason to believe in something timeless. She wasn't wearing the tiara to overshadow Camilla. She was wearing it because someone had to carry forward the parts of the monarchy that still made people feel something real. In that room, the clash wasn't about protocol, it was about identity. It was legacy versus insecurity, symbol versus survival. One woman had inherited the crown, the other had inherited the people, and both knew which one held more power in the long run. When the confrontation ended, Camilla didn't return to the spotlight. Not immediately. Days passed without her presence at key events. Public engagements were quietly cancelled. There was no explanation, no formal statement, but everyone inside the palace knew the impact of that meeting ran deeper than anything the cameras had caught. The fallout had begun, and what happened next would divide not just the palace, but the very image of the monarchy itself. She never demanded attention, never fought for the spotlight, but somehow, Catherine's silence spoke volumes, and that quiet strength began to crown her in ways no title ever could. While Camilla retreated behind palace curtains, Catherine moved forward without changing pace. There were no statements issued, no rebuttals leaked, no royal aides scrambling to clean up a narrative. Catherine did the one thing that no one expected. She remained still. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happened. The public leaned in closer. The media, starved for scandal, found none. Yet their fascination grew. Because what Catherine understood and what so many underestimated was that sometimes the loudest authority comes from calm. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strength. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. In a monarchy that thrives on spectacle, Catherine's quiet dignity was beginning to feel like a revolution. Polls surged in her favor. Support that had always been steady became something far deeper, emotional, protective, loyal. Headlines no longer referred to her as a future queen. They began calling her the real face of the monarchy. And when she next appeared at a public event, without tiaras, without symbolism, without even her husband by her side, the turnout was staggering. Crowds gathered in numbers typically reserved for coronations. Children reached for her hands. Elderly royalists wiped tears. And commentators couldn't help but notice King Charles was present that day too. Yet it was Catherine's name they chanted. The shift was undeniable. The emotional bond between Catherine and the public had evolved into something sacred. People weren't just admiring her anymore. They were defending her, embracing her, holding her up as the one figure in the royal family who still felt human, still felt real. And while Catherine said nothing about the drama swirling behind palace walls, the people had already chosen who they trusted. She had never asked to lead the emotional monarchy, but the crown was finding her anyway. Meanwhile, Camilla, once the central figure in the queen consort narrative, began to blur into the background. news outlets covered her less. Tabloids, once eager to document her every move, shifted focus. Royal correspondents spoke of a changing tide, of a palace struggling to define its future. And Camilla's absence from major events began to raise questions not about her role, but about her relevance. All the while Catherine rose, not through manipulation, not through force, through presence, through poise. Through being the embodiment of everything the monarchy once promised and rarely delivered: grace under pressure, humility with power, and compassion without performance. But the weight of what had happened still lingered, and the crown that once seemed so secure on Camilla's head now felt precariously fragile. Who knew a single tiara could shake the foundations of power, legacy, and identity? But this wasn't just about jewelry, it was about who the people believed should carry the soul of the crown. The lover's knot tiara had never merely been an ornament. From the moment Diana first wore it, its destiny had shifted. What was once a royal heirloom became a vessel of emotional memory, a symbol not of monarchy's rigidity, but of one woman's suffering, dignity, and transformation under the unbearable weight of the crown. That legacy didn't vanish with Diana's passing. It lingered, quietly, waiting for a moment to return. And when Catherine placed that tiara on her head, it returned with the force of history itself. But what no one foresaw was how that single gesture would expose the cracks deep within the institution, cracks that tradition could no longer plaster over. What had once been a monarchy driven by bloodlines and hierarchy was now becoming something different, something more volatile, more vulnerable. This wasn't just about who wore the crown. It was about who carried the soul of the monarchy, the unspoken values of compassion, grace, and moral strength. Camilla, for all her years of perseverance and protocol, had fought to fit the mold. But Catherine, without trying, had become the mold itself. Not because she sought the throne, but because the people had placed her there above ceremony, above politics, above fear. As weeks turned to months, the royal narrative shifted dramatically. Camilla's once cemented role as queen consort began to look more like a placeholder than a permanent fixture. Analysts on television delicately began to question her relevance, while online voices became louder, more emotional, and unapologetically clear. The people were with Catherine. Not because she claimed Diana's crown, but because she honored her spirit without exploiting it. In Catherine, they saw not a replacement, but a rightful continuation. Meanwhile, the tiara itself refused to fade from the headlines. Every public appearance Catherine made reignited the debate. Its meaning had outgrown its diamonds. It became a flashpoint in discussions about succession, symbolism, and the future of the monarchy. Would Catherine redefine what it meant to rule not just with power, but with empathy? Could the monarchy evolve not through declarations, but through a quiet, generational shift of affection? The questions multiplied, and so did the divide between the throne and the people's hearts. Yet, even in this storm, the institution didn't collapse. The monarchy did not break, but it did bend. The shape of its legacy, once rigid and inherited, began to shift subtly, but irrevocably. Catherine became a beacon of continuity, not because of her title, but because she embodied what so many longed to see in a crown: humility, humanity, and history all wrapped into one. Camilla, still crowned, still respected, stood in the background of a legacy that had slipped silently from her grasp. And all of it, every turn, every tremble, had started with a single, glittering heirloom that refused to stay silent. And so, as history quietly turns its pages, one truth remains: some crowns are never given. They're chosen by the people. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.